Hey everybody, Father Warner here. Today is the 15th of October. It's memorial of Saint Teresa of Jesus. Uh, Today we also would also have been Wednesday in the 28th week in ordinary time. The gospel text remains the same, even though it's a memorial, or rather, it is a continuation of the gospel we've been following. Luke chapter 11, verses 42 to 46. Now, uh, as I explained yesterday, that you need to read Luke chapter 11, verses 37 till the end of the chapter, that is 54, as one composite unit. The lectionary breaks it up into three sections. We heard the first part yesterday. Remember, Jesus is at the home of a Pharisee who invites him, and Jesus gives him literally a tongue lashing in yesterday's text. That tongue lashing continues today for not only the Pharisees, but for also a lawyer or a scribe who happened to be there at the meeting and who asked Jesus, well, why do you speak in such a way? You do us a great disrespect. And Jesus doesn't mince words, he doesn't hold back. As I said, he gives them a good tongue lashing. So today we're going to do the second part, and we start with verse 42 and we will end at verse 46. Now, really, the heart of this teaching is whether we um, follow frills of the faith or we follow the core of the faith. Very interestingly, Chat GPT popped up for me and it said it kind of summarized my teachings on this three section, and it actually summarized it very, very well. That the heart of really this teaching for me, as I interpret it, is not on the external expressions of the faith, which are very clearly important, but they become irrelevant if it doesn't come from the core of our being, from the abundance of the heart. Our behavior flows, our mouth, the words from our mouth flow, etc., etc. So, are we following frills or are we following the true faith? Now, I remember uh, that one of my mentors was a priest by the name of Father Larry, and I remember Father Larry always, and I'm going back to an old teaching because I made a reference to it before I began researching on this topic. Father Larry had a deep impact on my life, and he would often say that religion is like a river. At its source, it is pure until men begin to throw their garbage in it. And we've seen this literally is the state of many of our rivers in India. For those who live in Bombay, in the city of Mumbai, you would be surprised that the Methi River between Mahim and Bandra was so large that at one time it the banks of the river extended from Mahim Church all the way down to the Bandra railway station. Now you can see how much of reclamation has taken place, and obviously it's one of the filthiest rivers. This was a river whereby which the Portuguese brought their ships into the city of Mumbai and then went up to the harbor. So religion, like a river, at its source is pure, and then of course men throw all their garbage. And this would be a very good example of the Pharisees, the scribes, who were also called lawyers. They were not civil lawyers, but lawyers who, what we would call in Christian teaching, apologists for the faith, for the Jewish faith. That's who the lawyers were. Now, really, when you look at the law of God as enshrined in the Ten Commandments, there were just 10 commandments. God didn't complicate our lives. He gave us 10 commandments. But by the time of Jesus, there were exactly 613 prescriptions or interpretations of the law. And here's the interesting thing: if you break it down, 248 of these prescriptions, of these 613 prescriptions, 248 were positive and they corresponded to parts of the human body, whereas 365 were negative and they corresponded to the days in the year. Now, today's gospel has four wars against, three wars against the Pharisee and one war against the scribes, together four. If you read Matthew's gospel, Jesus has seven woes against the Pharisees and the scribes, more because Matthew uh, always worked in numbers of seven or in multiples of seven. And you see this very often because seven was a number of perfection. In this case, uh, it was all about imperfection seven times. So there are four woes against the Pharisees and the scribes, who, by the time of Jesus, had become de facto authorities on the law. Now, why did this happen? Because from the last prophet till John the Baptist, there was 400 years of silence when it came to prophecy or to hearing the prophetic voice of God. And during this point of time, the Pharisees and the scribes arose. Now, I have explained in yesterday's teaching, and I recommend you go back to it. I explained the origins of the Pharisees as being separated ones and what does it mean. But the Pharisees and scribes, in that sense, became go to people on religious matters. Um, but sadly, they began to add their own interpretations. Now, let me give you an example. The Talmud and the Mishnah are commentaries. So, the Talmud is a commentary on the Torah. The Torah is the first five books of which constitute the law for the Jews, which for us is the Pentateuch. Penta meaning five. So, the first five books. So, the Talmud was a commentary on the Torah, and the Mishnah was a commentary on the Talmud. So you have a commentary on the commentary, and all these commentaries were written somewhere between the first century before Christ up to the fifth century after Christ, and it contained the teachings and the opinions of thousands uh, different rabbis. So these rabbis gave their opinions orally. It was because it was circulating orally that they began to write them down and put them in written form, and that's where the problem begins. Okay, now Jesus is not attacking the law very clearly. Remember, in Matthew's gospel he says, I have not one dot, not one iota of the law will pass away. He has not come to destroy the law and the prophets, he has come to fulfill them. He will say in Matthew chapter 5 several times, he will say, you have heard it said, but I say to you. Why does he say this? Because you have heard it orally, but I am the authority, I am the lawgiver, I am God, and therefore I say to you. And he will demand much more than the interpretations, and if I may say, the misinterpretations of the Pharisees and the scribes. So the Pharisees and the scribes have finally deviated from the core matters of the truth. And here's the problem, because they their interpretation really, and Jesus is going to confront it, will their interpretations woefully neglect the central mysteries, the core commands of God, in favor of traditions and practices based on human interpretations. And I say this, I said this yesterday, I'm saying it again today. Woe be upon us today when we make such a song and dance about human traditions linked to very often sacramental life. Yeah, we hold these as more sacrosanct than simply loving God and loving our neighbor, which Jesus says very clearly is the new commandment I give to you. So there is what I call today a piety gap. A piety gap. You know, when if you're in London and several cities, even in Hong Kong, you will constantly hear, when you get to the London tube or the underground or the metro, depending upon which country you live in, you will hear, please mind the gap. Why? Because between the platform and the train is a gap. And there was a piety gap here, yeah, between the commandments of God and the practice of the faith. There was a gap. Now, if you don't mind the gap, you end up falling in the gap. So today's teaching, and this is really the introduction in the last 9 minutes that I'm giving you, is all about, please mind the piety gap. Okay, you may be pious from the outside, but Jesus is going to say to you and me, you are completely rotten from the inside. Okay, so woe to you, Pharisees, verse 42, for you tithe mint and rue and every herb, and neglect justice, and you neglect the love of God. and these you ought to have done without neglecting the others. Now, I'm not going to give a teaching on tithing, but if you tithe, congratulations. Tithing is mentioned in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 22, in Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30, in the context of thanksgiving. We give to God because we give honor to God. We want to give honor to God. We love God and we want to share. Okay. Now, you do tithe means 1/10. Can I give 1/20th because Father, this month I'm really struggling? Yes, you could. Can you give 20% of your income? Well, if you're a billionaire, what is the difficulty in giving 20%? Yeah. So don't cling on to this law. In the city of Mumbai, it is recommended that every Catholic give 1%. I mean, this is like scraping the bottom of the barrel when we want to, run the works of the church. I think this was we were afraid, or the bishops were afraid, in my opinion, of asking for generosity. Of course, they never laid the maximum amount, but they said, can you at least give 1%? Who can't? Why? And who is demanding it? Yeah. But to recommend, in my humble opinion, to recommend such a low amount very often does not even help us to cover our expenses. Having said that, we should never hold a gun on the shoulders of the poor who cannot uh, eke out a living, and they should be happily excused. But my experience has been that the poor are more generous than the rich. I have no disrespect for the rich, but my experience has been that the poor give generously. The rich give, and maybe if you're a very wealthy person listening to this, you need to ask whether in your life you are capable of giving 25 and even 30%, and it won't pinch your pocket. At the most, you may not be able to buy your latest Patek Philippe watch, but you can buy. I have a fossil that somebody gave me. Buy a fossil for this month, or whatever the case may be. But you get the point that I'm making. I'm not disparaging the rich. I'm not condemning the generosity of even the 1% that is given. I have my opinions, and we should be open to listening to each other's opinions. But here's the point: tithing is important. Now, what was very interesting is Jesus says that you tithe mint and rue and cumin and every kind of herbs. Now, these were aromatic herbs, these were spices, and there was no law that demanded a tithe on this only. The tithe was on grains, on pulses, on wine, but nothing of this. But see how scrupulous they have got. Now they want to give also a tithe on these minor things. Yet the Pharisees would count every seed one by one in order to give exactly 1/10. Imagine taking mustard and counting your grains of mustard, and Jesus is saying that's how ridiculous it is. Counting all the mustard and then counting 1/10 of mustard seeds in order to give it, because Jesus also says dill and cumin. I don't know how they would have counted it, but that's how ridiculous faith can get. So, love of God is the most crucial. Now, in verse 43, Jesus will say, for you love the best seats in the synagogue. He will talk to the Pharisees. And the love of God, this word agape theon, theos meaning God, appears 143 times in the New Testament, and mostly it appears positively. It's a self sacrificing love. But Jesus will talk about the Pharisees loving their great attachment also to their seats of position. I'll take that up. But here's the point that Jesus is making. Can we follow John chapter 15, verse 12? Love one another more than you love your things, more than you love the frills of the faith, because very often the smells and the bells of the Catholic Church are more attractive than the core teachings of the Catholic Church. So Jesus used the word woe. He used the word in some translations, alas, woe to you. And it communicates both a sadness. When you say woe to you, it communicates a sadness. It also communicates an anger. And Jesus, it's like in modern day language we would say, man, what is wrong with you? Man, what is wrong with you communicates both sadness in a way, like why would you do this? It also communicates anger. So it communicates both, and that's what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees. Really, guys, what's wrong with you? Yeah. So faith uh, is not celebrated when we get calculative with what we give God. It's not celebrated. Faith is never celebrated if faith is everything is perfect at right angles. I know when I go to the Vatican, I'm often I say, wow, these liturgies are great. But then you come to India, you come to Asia, you come to Africa, and while we should never compromise with the liturgical norms of the church, and I have done that as a young priest, we should never do that. Having a faith where the whole liturgy is at right angles without the joy of the faith also becomes a little meaningless. So faith is not a matter of everything at perfect right angles, and how is the altar server standing at the same time. It shouldn't be shabby. I'm not making a case for it being shabby, but faith without love is a faith that is celebrated in right angles only. So the Pharisees uh, never spoke of, even in this text, giving a 1/10 of love to God, but they speak of giving 1/10 of their tithes. But can we give 1/10 of our love to God? God has filled us with love. We share our love for people that we love. We will call them, we'll email them, we'll message them, we'll have lunch with them, we'll spend time with them. Can we give God 1/10 of our love? That's a thought for you. So here's the point that Jesus is making, and I want to sum up verse 42. Is the offering more important than the one to whom it is offered? Yeah, is our tithe more important than the one to whom we are offering it to? You can have a fine offertory procession, can have the best gifts in the offertory procession, uh, but what is offered is really not important. What really you should be offering, these are external expressions. Even bread and wine are external expressions of what is being celebrated in our heart. May you turn this bread and wine into your body and blood to be nourished for us. Now, verse 43, the second woe. Woe to you, Pharisees, for you love the best seat in the synagogue and salutations in the marketplace. You'll see this similarly in Matthew's gospel. Jesus says, you stand saying your prayers at market squares, wearing your long phylacteries and your tassels, and you want people to call you rabbi. Now, you know, when I read this text, when I was a seminarian in St. Pius X College in Mumbai, our diocesan seminary, we had a meeting of all the bishops of India, and I remember this as clear as daylight because we had, we've grown to celebrate our Bombay bishops who have been exceedingly simple. Cardinal Simon, Cardinal Ivan, Cardinal Ozzy, now Archbishop John, exceedingly simple, and also the auxiliaries. I've never seen them strut around in their finery. And when it calls for it, they would do it. But that's not the point. But I remember this bishop from one part of India, I'm not going to tell you where, who came to the seminary. And I remember very distinctly him sticking out his hand like this, as if kiss my ring. And one of the seminarians, I don't know whether it was disrespectful or it was a swift move of giving him a good, humble dose of humility. He just held his hand and he said, Bishop, that's a beautiful ring. Where did you get it from? That's the point that Jesus is making. You want the best seats, you want the salutation, you want people to kiss your ring, and you can be a bishop, a priest, you can be an ordinary person. To give you another anecdote, I remember very clearly. Once I was very close to Cardinal Ozzy. I loved him. I love him as a father. And in the seminary, we called him Ozzy when he taught us canon law. Then he became the Archbishop, auxiliary bishop, Archbishop of Agra, and came back as Archbishop of Bombay, and then got the title of Cardinal. And I remember I was at a meeting I was the secretary of the National Eucharistic Congress to celebrate the 50th year of the Eucharistic Congress that we had in 1964 when Pope Paul VI had come to India. And in one of the meetings, I looked at Cardinal Ozzy and I said to him, but Father, and I carried on. I addressed him as Father. I remember a secretary of his pulling me aside at the end of the meeting and saying, how can you call him Father? He is your eminence. And my response to him was this: my dear father, and I won't tell you his name, I said, you can call him your eminence as much as you want. But for me to call him father is a term of endearment. It doesn't diminish his status. Yeah, you can bend and scrape and call him your eminence, but you may never have the love that I have in my heart for him. And this is the problem with us. We want to run these circles of nonsense around our religious leaders, yeah, when there is no love that really comes for them. You can call them your eminence, your lordship, you can call them every title you want. Just 2 days ago, or a few days ago, because remember, I always record this earlier, I saw a lovely video of a young man young boy who went to meet the Pope, kissed his hand, and then went, I think he kissed his feet. It was an expression of love. Yeah. And there could be somebody. I remember when I met Father Leon in Medjugorje, I hugged him and I kissed him on the cheek, and he was a little taken aback. And I told him, I said, "That's me. That's me." Yeah. But I have such great affection for your boldness, Father Leon, that I want to, like, that came out as an expression of affection. So Jesus says, stop being a hypocritical religious leader that wants all these fancies and the frills without having the love. Pharisees loved their seats, and this is the problem. Today, you can be a bishop, a priest, a lay leader in the church, and you can love your seats without loving the people whom you are called to be a pastoral shepherd, over. So I love the seat, but I don't love the people who come with the seat. So we want our rightful place in society, and we often do it by denying God. That's the worst thing. We want our rightful place as bishops, as priests. We want people to acknowledge us. We want our rightful place in society, but often we deny God his rightful place, and he is the maker of heaven and earth. We deny God the rightful place in his world. And this is being done today by even secular leaders who want to have their rightful place and addressed by the right titles, but they deny God their rightful place. Both laity as well as, both religious as well as secular leaders have this problem. Verse 44. Woe to you, for you are like graves which are not seen, and men walk over them without knowing. Now, this was an insult that, I mean, Jesus pulls back no punches. Graves were whitewashed at the time of Jesus for a reason, so that you would identify the grave and you would not trample upon it, because the minute you walked upon a grave, you became unclean, ritually unclean. A grave was considered unclean, so you became defiled. And Jesus calls the Pharisees, he says, you are like unmarked graves. Yeah, you have become like irrelevant people. People don't even see you anymore, but you have become like unmarked graves. Therefore, the people who come in contact with you, uh, with the Pharisees, with the scribes, they get defiled. Here's what Jesus is saying to the Pharisees: not only have you defiled yourself, yeah, because you are like unmarked graves, but now the people who come in contact with you are also unmarked. He calls them like graves. He says, from the outside you may have, look beautiful, but inside you are rotting. Your spirituality is rotten. Jesus is not holding punches. I often think, you can put your beloved person, and you do it out of great love, in the most expensive coffin, but remember, it's a dead corpse. Yeah. If you don't have the love in the heart for the person that you are burying, if that love doesn't exist, you can put the most expensive coffin to show the whole world how much you love. The world knows. The world knows. Yeah. So this was a double insult to the Pharisees. Not only are you unclean yourself, but you make all those who come into contact with you unclean. The last two verses, verse 45. One of the lawyers answered, Teacher, in saying this, you reproach us also. When you're getting a mouthful from Jesus, shut your mouth. That is the moral of the story. So uh, we often see Jesus as the sweetheart of Jesus, this gentle Jesus. Now you're going to see him in verse 45 and 46, not only the gentle Jesus, but he's not only going to be meek and kind, he is meek, but he's now going to get pretty riled. Yeah. So Jesus did not wish uh, for the Pharisees to be condemned, for their condemnation. Um, but their hard hearts has brought out these harsh words. When your heart is hard, then sometimes the only thing that helps you is a good dose, even if it's a bit harsh. Now, these were Pharisees and scribes. They were educated, but it doesn't mean that because you are educated, you have wisdom. Yeah. It could also make you conceited. And Jesus is now going to confront this lawyer who is a conceited man. He says, when you speak like this in front of everybody, in front of these peasants, these ordinary parishioners, you, Father, you're insulting the parish council. How can you speak like this? Sometimes parish councils deserve a good dose, yeah, especially when they're full of themselves and not full of the people whom they represent. I've often said this. My dear friend Father Larry used to always say this when people would come and say, Father, people are saying, and he would always say, besides you and your wife, can you name two other people? Yeah, and this is true, you know, it's true. So this was a good example also of, in verse 45, of Jesus confronting, not behind their backs, but he confronts them. Yet we also know that Christ forgave them on the cross. He will say, Father, forgive them all, because they do not know what they are doing. Verse 46, and with this we end. And he said, Woe to you, lawyers, also, for you load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one finger. This is a very loaded teaching. It's literally, it says, Do as I say, but do not do as I do. That's what the Pharisees were doing. And today we are creating in very similar ways in our churches, you know, these general laws and rules and regulations without solving particular problems. Let me give an example. When I was in the seminary, we had a lovely system where we could bring our friends. If they just popped in, we would say, come for lunch. And then some brothers began to misuse this. You know, they would get 6 and 7 friends, and then they would tell people from their own tribe and parts of the country that they all came from. They'll say, you, each one of you, bring one guest. And there was an abuse because food was running short. The seminary at that point of time made a blanket rule for everybody. And I often feel these blanket rules are terrible. We should rather confront people, even though they may accuse us of being, uh, uh, you know, uh, if I may use the word, racist at times. No, confront people when they are doing this. Don't make general laws. That's the first thing, because the Pharisees made general laws for everybody, because obviously they must have seen an abuse. So you burden people with unreasonable today parochial laws. I've seen this so often. I go to a parish and I say, but why was this law brought in? I don't know, Father. Father so and so said it has to be done. Quite recently, I heard of a parish where they said all those above 70 should not serve in the parish. Ah, really? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Rather, we should tell a 71-year-old who is really struggling to distribute Holy Communion, can you step down? And maybe we'll be accused of being partial. They'll say, oh, Father is very, he has certain friends in the parish. You know, if you're a priest with a straight conscience, you can take these negative comments. And remember, people are not always happy. But to put a blanket law and prevent many senior citizens, and by the way, who's serving our churches today? It's the senior citizens. Yeah, it's those above the age of 60. You barely find young people wanting to do the service of, you know, of this kind of service. Now, in the parish that I'm talking about, uh, there may be hundreds of people. It may be a big parish. You can't afford to do this in a smaller parish. But here's the point: don't make laws which become blanket laws. And Jesus very clearly says, "You load men with burdens hard to bear, and you yourself do not touch the burdens with one finger." So this is double standards that Jesus is also confronting. The double standards of uh, of religious people, you know. And by the way, these double standards are not only limited to church. It happens in your office, it happens in your home. As parents, sometimes you also have double standards. So God does not, the church does not have a monopoly on double standards. It is being had everywhere else. But Jesus, remember, came to lift our burdens. He very clearly says, come to me, all you who labor and are overburdened, and I will give you rest. That's the purpose of Jesus. He came to lift these human, man made rules, regulations that burden us, that burden the people at his time and burden us even now. Um, uh, and remember, by the time of Jesus, there were 39 prescriptions that you could not do on the Sabbath, when God only gave one rule, that was keep the law, keep the Sabbath holy. So we keep adding all these rules and regulations sometimes in our church without reviewing them also. And we need to review some of these archaic, what I call home baked or parochial rules that one parish priest made in 1939, because of a particular situation, and we don't even evaluate it. So uh, this is something that we need to, as priests. And I want to end with this last point, because Jesus says to us priests also, uh, do not load men with burdens that are hard for them to bear. We as priests need to be conscious also about this. In the past there was a beautiful uh, prayer that we would say when we put on our vestments. Today we just put it on. By the way, every vestment was linked to something meaningful. And when we put on the chasuble as priests, the chasuble was linked to the yoke and the burdens of Jesus that we were called to share. We carried the burdens of Jesus. We carried also his friendship that he invited us to. Finally, to us priests also in the confessional, we should not burden people with harsh comments. With See, the point of the and let me make this very clear: the point of the confessional for you as penitents, and for me as a penitent also, the point is not to feel good. The point of the confessional is to renounce our sin. Very often we want to come there to feel good, not renounce our sin. But having said that, a pastor must have a pastor's heart, not say nasty and harsh things. And people have told me, Father, I don't go to confession because the priest was very harsh with me, very nasty with me. And that is a sad thing. I hope this teaching helps you. It broadens your horizon, your perspective, your understanding. As I often say, I talk to all groups. Yeah, don't only apply this to your priest in your parish and go and show him this video and say, Father Warner said this, but look at it also for yourself. Are we becoming Pharisees? Are we becoming scribes? Is there only a selective understanding of the faith that we want to cling on, without really becoming people, as Jesus calls us, people of great hearts, of great love? May God bless you, the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. I'll see you again tomorrow. Don't forget to like this teaching, share it with your friends, subscribe to this channel, and leave your comments. Bye for now.